samsaradava nalalita loka Pranaya karuna gana ganatvam Praptasya kalyana gunanavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Mahaprabhu Kirtana Nitya Gita Varitra Madhyan Manasorasena Romancha Kampa Shutaranga Vajo Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Shri Vigrahara Dana Nityananam Shingarathan Mandira Marjanado Yuktasya Bhaktam Saniyunjatopi Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Chaturvida Shri Bhagavad Prasado Swadana Triptan Hari Bhaksha Sangram Kritraiva Triptim Bhajata Sadaiva Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Shri Radhika Madhavayorapara Madhurya Leela Gunarupanam Nam Pratikshanazvadanalolupasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Nikunja yono ratikeli sedhai Yayali bir yukti rapekshaniyai Tatratidaksha ativalabhasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Sakshadaриtvena samastashatsre uktastatha bhayate vasadbhir Kinto pravorya priya eva tasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Yasya prasada bhagavad prasado Yasya prasada nagati kutopi Jayam stuvam stasaya satrisadyam Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda 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 Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Pastyatya Deshatharine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Chaitanya Nityananda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Chaitanya Nityananda Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Nila Madhava Radha Nila Madhava Radhe. Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Shri Radhe, Jaya जय जगन्नाथ जय बालदेव जय सुभद्रमा जय सुदर्शन चक्र जय सीताराम जय सीताराम सीताराम जय लक्ष्मण हनुमान जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह लक्ष्मी नरसिंह जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह जय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय जय प्रभुपद जय प्रभुपद प्रभुपद जय प्रभुपद जय गुरुदेव जय गुरुदेव गुरुदेव जय गुरुदेव निताय गौरा हरि बोल हरि बोल निताय गौरा हरि बोल हरि बोल निताय गौरा हरि बोल
प्रतिष्ठा विविध सांस्कृतिक वैष्णव शिरोमणि पावन श्रील प्रभुपाद जी महाराज की जय। श्री गौरी गुरु वर्गा उद्धार की जय। श्री रूप सनातन भद्र गुनाथ श्री जीव गोपाल भट्ट दास गुण सदगोस्वामी प्रभु की जय। नामाचार्य शैल हरिदास ठाकुर जी की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासरि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। परम दयाल से नित्यानंद प्रभु की जय। जय प्रेम नाम संकीर्तन एक जनक प्रेम पुरुषोत्तम श्री सच्चिदानंद स्मरण गौर चैतन्य महाप्रभु गौर हरिमावर नय अवतार की जय। गोलोके प्रेम धाम हरि नाम संकीर्तन जय की जय। जुग धर्म हरे कृष्ण महामंत्र की जय। बृहद निदांग ट्रांसडेंटल बुक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन सेवा की जय। श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप नारदा कुंद समकुंद गिरिराज गोवर्धन की जय। श्री ब्रजभूम वृंदावन मथुर धाम की जय। द लॉर्डशिप श्री श्रीराधंजल माधव की जय। श्री श्री मायापुर नवद्वीप एक चक्र धाम की जय। परम करुण श्री गौर निताय की जय। श्री पुरुषोत्तम क्षेत्र जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय। श्री श्री जगन्नाथ स्वामी बलदेव प्रभु स्मस्पद्र देवी सुदर्शन चक्र भगवान की जय। भक्ति सर्व विघ्न विनाशन कर सिंहरे भगवान की जय। जगंगा माई जमुना माई की जय। तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी भक्ति देवी की जय। श्रीमती प्रधारानी की जय। समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय। निताय गौर हरि ब्रह्मानंदे। All glory to the Son of God. All glory to the Son of God. All glory to the Son of God. All glory to the glory. Shri Shri Guru Shri Gauranga.
नमस्ते नरसिंहाय
Namaste Narasingaya.
नमस्ते नमस्ते नरसिंहाय प्रहलाद लाददायिने हिरण्यकाशी पूषः शिलटंका नकालाए इतो नरसिंहा पर तो नरसिंहा यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंहा जतो जतो जामि ततो बाहिर नरसिंहा हृदय नरसिंहा बाहिर नरसिंहा हृदय नरसिंहमदिं शरणं प्रपदे नरसिंहमदिं शरणं प्रपदे तव कर कमल वरे नाकाम अद्भुत श्रृंगाम दलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृंगा केशवधीर्ता नरहरि रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे तव कर कमल बले नाकाम अद्भुत श्रृंगार दलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृंगा केशवधीर्ता नरहरि रूपा जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय नरसिंह देव जय नरसिंह देव जय नरसिंह देव जय नरसिंह देव जय नरसिंह रे नरसिंह रे नरसिंह रे जय नरसिंह रे जय भक्त प्रहलाद जय भक्त प्रहलाद जय भक्त प्रहलाद जय प्रहलाद महाराज जय भक्त प्रहलाद भक्त प्रहलाद भक्त प्रहलाद जय भक्त प्रहलाद जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय प्रभुपाद प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय गुरुदेव 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 बोल नरसिंह भगवान की जय भक्त प्रहलाद की जय प्रभुपाद महाराज की जय गुरुदेव महाराज की जय
श्री वृंदाई तुलसी देवाय प्रिय सब सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रारे देवी सतवताय नमः वृंदायै तुलसीदेवाय प्रियै केशवसुत विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी सतवताय नमः। वृंदाय तुलसीदेवाय प्रियै केशवसुत विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी सतवताय नमः। श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी वृंदा देवी की।
Or take it in hand. Yeah, it will break because it's tight. Some with the first. Namo Namaha Tulasi Krishna Priyasi Namo Namaha. राधा कृष्ण सेवा पाओ प्रिय विलासी।
राधा कृष्ण सेवा पाओ प्रिय विलासी।
राधा कृष्ण सेवा पाओ प्रिया विलासी।
राधा कृष्ण सेवा
है तो मार शरण लोय तारा वंश पूर्ण होय। कृपा कोरि कोरो तारे वृंदावन वासी।
कृपा कोरि कोरो तारे वृंदावन।
मोर ये अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियो नयने हरिबो सदा युगल रूपरासी। नयने हरिबो सदा युगल रूपरासी। हे निवेदन दरो शकीरनुगत करो। हे निवेदन दरो शकीरनुगत करो। सेवा अधिकार दिए करो निज दासी सेवा अधिकार दिए करो निज दासी दीन कृष्ण दासे कहे न मोर होय दीन कृष्ण दासे कहे न मोर होय श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेम सदा ये न भासी श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेम सदा ये न भासी यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रदक्षिणन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hari Bol. जय तुलसी महारानी, जय तुलसी महारानी, जय वृंदा देवी, जय वृंदा देवी. नित्य गौर हरि बोल, हरि बोल, हरि बोल, नित्य गौर हरि बोल. जय जय प्रभुपाद, 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद.
श्री वृंदाई तुलसी बाई प्रिय जय कृष्ण सब सत्य विष्णु भक्ति पदे सतवताय नमः. Dai tulasi devai priya kesava satta Vishnu bhakti prade devi satavatai namo namo Vindai tulasi devai priya kesava satta Vishnu bhakti prade devi satavatai namo namo Srimati Tulasi Maharani Vrindadevi ki O Tulasi, beloved Krishna, I bow before you again and again. My desire to obtain the service of Shri Radha and Krishna. Whoever takes shelter of his wishes fulfilled, bestow your mercy upon him, you make him resident of Vrindavan. My desire that you also give me residence, let the grove of Shri Vrindavan. As within my vision, as always behold, beautiful pastime of Radha and Krishna. I beg to make me your covenant of flesh. Please give me the privilege of devotional service. Make me your own maid servant. Please very holy and Lord servant Krishna praise. May I always sing the love of Shri Radha and Govind. Srimati Krishna Radha Devi. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Darshanat Madmahatam Karotuva Dadatava Vidadatulam Pato Matpranatastu Saivana Para Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Kristatam Ki Jai Om Mahavranaya Krishna Prema Pradaya Krishna Glory to the Sri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart with the dust documented for years, and extinguishes the fire conditioned life of repeated birth and death. The Sankirtan moment is the prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss, and enables us to fully test the nectar for which we're always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govind. In these transcendental names, you have invested with your transcendental energies. There's no even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness, you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names. But I'm so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. Once you chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself a lord and straw in the street, one should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige. One should be ready to offer respect to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your cause and devotion service birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor. Yet some or rather fall in this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms of your lotus feet. O my Lord, for will my eyes will be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy names. When my voice choke up, or with the hairs of my body stand on hand at the recitation of your holy name.
O Govinda, feeling your separation,
I am
after
from
feeling
spring
that
moment
moment
to
to be like 12
years
years or more.
Tears
Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain.
and I feel all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and he should remain so. Even if he sandals me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me, he is completely free to do anything and everything, but he's always my worshipful Lord, unconditioned. Ishri Shikyastakam Ki Jai. Om Mahabharam Nai. There are 10 offenses in matter of chanting the holy name of the Lord that must be avoided. They are as follows. 1. Blaspheme, the glory of deity, get a life of propagating the holy name of the Lord. 2. Consider names the demigods of Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma to be equal to or independent of the name Lord Vishnu. 3. Disobey the orders of the spiritual master. 4. Blaspheme the Vedic literatures and pursuits of Vedic version. 5. Consider the glory of chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination's sakes, to give some interpretation to the holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities on strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. 8. To consider the chanting of Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are often Vedas as fruitive activity karma of Ganda. 9. To instruct the faithless person by the glory of the holy name. And 10. To not have complete faith in chanting the holy names and to maintain material attachments even after understanding so many instructions in this matter.
It is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting.
Every devotee who claims to be a Vaishnava must
Carefully guard against these 10 offenses. In order to quickly achieve the desired success, Krishna Prema. Now let us offer our most humble obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. They are just like desire trees that can fill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Vanchakalpatarabhyascha kripasindubhyevicha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha Vaishnava Thakur ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam Grantharaj ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Janmad yasya yato niriyad itaratas charte swavigyasvarat. Tene Brahma Hridaya Adhikavaye Muyantiya Surayaha. Tejo Varimadam Yata Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Marsha. Amnasrena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi. O my Lord, Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth and the primeval cause of all causes, of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations. And he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him. It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion.
By him, the great sages and demigods are placed into
As one is
illusion.
bewildered by the illusory representations
As one is bewildered by the illusory
of
representation
water seen on fire or land seen on
of
water.
water seen the fire lands in the water.
Only because of him do the material universes,
Only because of him do the material universe
temporarily manifested by the reaction of the three modes of nature,
temporarily manifested by the reaction of the three modes of nature
appear factual although they are unreal.
appear factual.
I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna,
I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna,
who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode,
who is eternally existent in the transcendental,
which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world.
which is forever free from the illusory representation of the material world.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute
Dharma
truth.
projita kaitravocha
Dharma Pujita Kaitavu
paramo nirmatsaranam satam
Ramo Nirmasranam Satam
vedyam vastavam atra vastu
Vedyam Vastavamastava
shivedam tapa trayonmu
Shivadam Tapo Trayom
Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite
Shrimad Bhagavate Maha
Kim va Purir
Kim
Ishvaraha
Va Paririshvara
Sadyo Hridi Avarudyate Tra
Sadhurudya Varidati
Krite Bihi Sususubhistakshana.
He Shushushvistat
Completely reject all religious activities which are materially motivated.
All religious activities which material
This Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth,
This Bhagavad Purana propounds the highest truth,
which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart.
which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart.
The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusions for the welfare of all.
The highest truth with a reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of
Such
all.
truth uproots the threefold mystery.
Such a truth uproots the threefold.
This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in its maturity,
This beautiful Bhagavatam compared with the great sage Vyasadeva in maturity
is sufficient in itself for God realization.
is sufficient itself for God.
What is the need of any other scripture?
What is the need of the other scripture?
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam,
As soon as one attentively submissively hears the message of
by this culture of knowledge,
by this culture,
the Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
the Supreme Lord is established in this.
Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam,
Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam.
sukhamukad amrita dravya samritam,
Sukhamukharam Dravya
pibata Bhagavatam rasam alayam,
Pivata Bhagavatam Vasama.
muhur ahoraska bhuvibhavakaha.
Hura Hura Sikha Bhudivaro.
O expert and thoughtful man, relish Srimad Bhagavatam,
O expert and thoughtful man, relish
the mature fruit of the desired true Vedic
the
literature.
mature fruit of the desired truth, Vedic
It
literature.
emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami.
It emanated from the lips of Shishukadeva.
Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful.
Therefore, this fruit has become even more
Although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all,
although its nectarian juice is already relishable,
including liberated souls.
including liberated.
Shinvatam Swakata Krishna,
Srivatam Sakata Krishna.
Punya Shravana Kirtana,
Punya Shravana Kirtana.
Idyantaksto Hi Bhadrani,
Vidyantasto Hibhadana.
Vidunati Srihitsatam.
Vidunati Surisa.
To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures,
To hear about Krishna from the Vedic
or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita,
or to hear from it directly through the Bhagavad.
it's itself righteous activity.
It is self-righteous.
And for one who hears about Krishna,
But who hears about
Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart,
Lord Krishna dwelling within everyone,
acts as a best wishing friend,
acts as the best wishing
and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him.
and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing.
Nasta presu abhadvesu,
Nasta Presha Bhadesu.
nityam bhagavata sevaya,
Nityam Bhagavati Se.
bhagavati uttamasloke,
Bhagavati Uttam Shloka.
bhaktir bhavati naistaki.
Bhakti Bhagavati Nasti.
In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge.
In this way, devotee naturally develops dormant transcendence.
As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam
As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavad,
and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the
he
Lord.
becomes fixed in devotional service to the Lord.
Tadarajastamo bhava,
Darajastamo Bhava.
kamalobhadayaschaye,
Kamalobhadayascha.
cheta itaranabidam,
Cheta Iterana.
stitvam sattve prasidati.
Tam Sattve Prasida.
By development of devotional service,
By development of devotional
one
service,
becomes freed from the modes of passion and
one
ignorance,
becomes free from the mode of passion.
and thus material lust and avarice are diminished.
And this material lust and avarice are given.
Evam prasana manaso,
Evam Prasanamana.
bhagavat bhakti yogataha,
Bhagavad Bhakti Yoga.
bhagavat tattva vijnanam,
Bhagavad Tattva
mukta
Vijnana.
sangasya jayate.
Mukta Sangha
When these
Sajaya.
impurities are wiped away,
When these impurities are wiped
the
away,
candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness.
the candidate remains steady in position,
Becomes enlivened by devotional service
becomes enlivened by
and
devotion,
understands the science of God perfectly.
and understands the science of God.
Vidite hridaya grantis,
Vidyate Hridaya Granthis.
Chidyante Sarvasamsaya Siyante Jasyakarmani Justa Evat Manishwari. Thus, Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection
And that's the Bhakti Yoga Siddha, the harness of material
and enables one to come at once to the stage of a samsayam samagram,
and enables one to come at once to the stage of assumption.
understanding of the Supreme Absolute Truth, Personality, Godhead.
Understanding supreme absolute truth, personality, God.
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna, from his devotees and Krishna consciousness,
can one understand the science of Krishna.
can one understand the science.
Shri Shri Guru Vastika prayers ki jai. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy, just as a cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it.
The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy, just as a cloud pours water on the forest fire to extinguish.
So the spiritual master delivers the materially afflicted world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence.
So the spiritual master delivers the material afflicted world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence.
From our respectful obeisance unto Lotus Street is such a spiritual master who is an ocean of auspicious qualities.
All from my respectful obeisance unto Lotus Feet to such a spiritual master who is an ocean of auspicious qualities.
Chanting the holy name, dancing in ecstasy, singing and playing musical instruments.
Chanting the holy name, dancing in ecstasy, singing and playing musical
The
instruments.
spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya
The
Mahaprabhu.
spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement, the Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Because he is relishing the mellows of pure devotion within his mind.
And because the relation the males of pure devotion from his mind.
Sometimes his hair stands on end.
Sometimes his hair stands
He
on
feels
end.
quivering in his body,
He feels quivering in his
and
body.
tears flow from his eyes like waves.
And tears flow from his eyes like
From our
waves.
respectful obeisance unto Lotus Feet is such a spiritual master.
All from my respectful obeisance to the Lotus Feet of such a
The
spiritual
spiritual master is always engaged in the temple worship of Shri Shri Radha and Krishna.
Spiritual master is always engaged in the temple worship. Shri Shri Radha and
He also
Krishna.
engages his disciples in such worship.
He also engages disciples in such worship.
They dress the deities in beautiful clothes and ornaments,
They eat in beautiful clothes and
clean their
ornaments,
temple,
clean their
and
temple,
perform other similar worship of the Lord.
and perform other similar worship.
From our respectful obeisance unto Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master.
Out from my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus Feet of such a spirit.
The spiritual master is always offering Krishna 4 kinds of delicious
The
food.
spiritual master is all from Krishna 4 kinds of delicious food.
Analyzes that which is licked, chewed, drunk, and sucked.
Analyze as that which is licked, chewed, drink, and sucked.
When the spiritual master sees that the devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavad Prasada,
When the spiritual master sees that devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavad Prasad,
he is
he
satisfied.
is satisfied.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master.
Offer my respectful obeisance to the Lotus Feet of such a spiritual
The
master.
spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and Madhava,
The spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and Madhava,
and their qualities, names, and forms.
and the qualities, name, and form.
The spiritual master aspires to relish these at every moment.
The spiritual masters aspire to relish this at every
I offer my
moment.
respectful obeisance unto Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master.
Offer my respectful obeisance to the Lotus Feet of such a spiritual
The spiritual master is very dear because he is expert at assisting the gopis who at different times make different tasteful arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavan.
The spiritual master is very dear because he's expert in assisting the gopis with different times, make different tasteful arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavan.
I offer my most humble obeisance unto Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus Feet of such a spiritual
The
master.
spiritual master is to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he is the most confidential servitor of the Lord.
The spiritual master is to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he's the most confidential servitor.
This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities.
This is acknowledged in all the revealed scriptures and followed by all the authorities.
Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master who is a bona fide representative of Shri Hari Krishna.
Therefore, I offer my humble obeisance unto the Lord of such a spiritual master who is a wonderful representative of Sri Hari Krishna.
Why, by the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna.
By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction. of
Without the
Krishna.
grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement.
Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement.
Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual master.
Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual
At least 3 times a day, I should offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus Feet of my spiritual master.
At least 3 times a day, I should offer my respectful obeisance to the Lord to my spiritual master.
Shri Brahma Samhita Ki Jai, Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha, Anadiradi Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam.
Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchit Ananda Vigraha Anadiradi Govinda Sarva Karana Karana
Chintamani Prakaya Satma Sukalpa Riksha.
Chintamani Prakata kalpaviksha
Lakshavitesu surabhirabhipaliyantam
lakshya surabhira vipalayantam
Lakshmi sahasra satasambhrama sevyamanam
lakshmi sahasra satasim brahma sevamanam
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
govindam adi purusham tamaham bhajami
Venam vanantam aravinda dalayataksham
venum panantam aravinda dayalataksham
Varhavatam samasitam buddha sundarangam
param vata samasitam buddha sundaram
Kandarpakoti kamaniya vishesha sobham
kandat pakoti kamaniya vishesha shobham
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
govindam adi purusham tamaham bhajami
Alola chandra kala sadvanavalya vamsi
alola chandra kala sarvanamalya vamsi
Ratnam gadam pranayakeli kalavilasam
Rannam gadam pranayakeli kalavilasam
Shyamam chibangalalitam niyata prakasam
Syamam tribhangalaritam niyata prakasam
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Govindam adi purusham tamaham bhajami
Angani yasya sakalendriya vrittimanti
Angani yasya sakalendriya vrittimanti
Pasyanti panti kalyanti chiram jaganti
Pasyanti panti kalayanti chiram jaganti
Ananda chinmaya sadujvala vigrahasya
Ananda chinmaya sadujvala vigrahasya
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Govindam adi purusham tamaham bhajami
Advaitam achyutam anadim anantarupam
Advitam achyutam anadim anantarupam
Adyam purana purusham navayovanam cha
Adyam purana purusham navajauvanam
Vede sudurlabham adurlabham atma bhakto
Vedeshi dullabham adullabham atma bhakto
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Govindam adi purusham tamaham bhajami
Pantastu koti satavatsata sampragamyo
Pantastu koti shatavatsala sampragami
Vayoratapi manaso munipungamanam
Vayo ratapi manaso muni pungavana
Sopyasti yat prapadasimya vichintya tatve
Sopyasti ya pravadasim chinchatat
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Govindam adi purusham tamaham bhajami
Ekopya sora chaitam jagadanda kotim
Ekapya sura chachitum jagadanta kuti
Yaschaktirasti jagadanda chaya yadanta
Yachakti rasti jagadanta chayasya
Andantarasta paramanu chayantarastam
Andantarasta paramanu chayantarashtam
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Govindam adi purusham tamaham bhajami
Yad bhava bhavita diyo manajastataiva
Yad bhava bhavita diyo manujasta daiva
Samprapya rupa mahima sanabhushanasa
Samprapya rupa mahima sanayana bhusha
Suktaryameva nigama pratitaistuvanti
Shuktir yameva nigama pratishaitastonti
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami
Srimad Bhagavatam Prantaraja Ki Jai Canto 2, Chapter 5, verse number 42. Purloka kalpita padvyam
Boloka kalpita bhagyam
Bhavarloko syanabitaha
Uvarloko samnavita
Swarloka kalpito murdana
Swaloka kalpito murna
Itiva loka kalpana.
Itiva loka kalpana
Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Others may divide the whole planetary system into three divisions, namely the lower planetary systems on the legs up to the earth, the middle planetary systems on the navel, and the upper planetary systems Swarga Loka, from the chest to the head of the Supreme Personality. Meaning Brahma. Purport. The three divisions of the complete planetary systems are here mentioned. 14 are imagined by others, and that is also explained. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport to the second canto, 5th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Cause of All Causes. So why does he say the upper planetary systems, and he says, the three divisions of complete planetary systems are here mentioned. 14 are imagined by others. And that is also explained. So we have read how the universal form, or Virat Rupa, is an imaginary form of the Lord. Why is it imaginary? Because it's not eternal. It only exists in the material worlds. Therefore he says in a purport, 14 are imagined by others, and that is also explained. But the fact is that there are three divisions of the material planets, lower, middle, and upper. Okay, so now I'm going to start chapter 6, Purusha Sukta confirmed. Brahmo Vacha Vacham Vahnir Mukam Shetram Chandrasam Saptadatava Havya Kavyam Ritananam Jiva Sarva Rasasya Cha. Translation by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Lord Brahma said, the mouth of the Virat Purusha, the universal form of the Lord, is the generating center of the voice, and the controlling deity is fire. His skin and 6 other layers are the generating centers of the Vedic hymns, and his tongue is the productive center of different foodstuffs and delicacies for offering to the demigods, the forefathers, and a general mass of people. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The opulences of the universal form of the Lord are described herein. So usually when it says opulences, it's referring to what's called vibhuti. The opulences of the universal form of the Lord are described herein. It is said that his mouth is the generating center of all kinds of voices, and its controlling deity is the fire demigod. And his skin and other 6 layers of bodily construction are the representative generating centers of the 7 kinds of Vedic hymns, like the Gayatri. Gayatri is the beginning of all Vedic mantras, and it is explained in the first volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. Since the generating centers are the different parts of the universal form of the Lord, and since the form of the Lord is transcendental to the material creation, it is to be understood that the voice, the tongue, the skin, etc., suggests that the Lord in his transcendental form is not without them. The material voice, or the energy of taking in foodstuff, is generated originally from the Lord. Such actions are but perverted reflections of the original reservoirs. The transcendental situation is not without spiritual variegatedness. In the spiritual world, all the perverted forms of material variegatedness are fully represented in their original spiritual identity. The only difference is that the material activities are contaminated by the 3 modes of material nature, whereas the potencies in the spiritual world are all pure because they are engaged in the unalloyed transcendental loving service of the Lord. In the spiritual world, the Lord is the sublime enjoyer of everything, and the living entities there are all engaged in his transcendental loving service without any contamination of the modes of material nature. The activities in the spiritual world are without any of the inebrities of the material world, but there is no question of impersonal voidness on the spiritual platform as suggested by the impersonalists. Devotional service is defined in the Narada Pancharatra as follows. Sarvapadi Vinir Muktam Tatparat Benam Nirmalam Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam Bhaktir Uchyate. Originally, since all the senses are produced of the Lord's reservoir of senses, the sensual activities in material world are to be purified by the process of devotional service. And thus, the perfection of life can be attained simply by purifying the present position of our material activities. And the purifying process begins from the stage of being liberated from the conception of different designations. Every living entity is engaged in some sort of service, either for self or for the family or for the society, country, etc. But unfortunately, all such services are rendered due to material attachment. The attachments of the material affinity may be simply changed to the service of the Lord, and thus the treatment of being freed from material attachment begins automatically. The process of liberation is therefore easier through devotional service than by any other methods. For in the Bhagavad Gita 12.5 it is said that one is subjected to various kinds of tribulations if one is impersonally attached. Kleso dikaritaras te sam avyakta shakta chetasam. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Prabhupada says, Lord Brahma said, the mouth of the Virat Purusha, the universal form of the Lord, is the generating center of the voice, and the controlling deity is fire. His skin and 6 other layers are the generating centers of the Vedic hymns, and his tongue is the productive center of different foodstuffs and delicacies for offering to the demigods, the forefathers, and the general mass of people. So this purport emphasizes 3 or 4 times that there's variegatedness in the spiritual world. Why does Prabhupada emphasize this so much? Because of the cancel culture of the Mayavadis, which is explained in Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila, chapter 7, verse number 114. Where it says, Sankaracharya, who is an incarnation of Lord Shiva, is faultless because he is a servant carrying out the orders of the Lord. But those who follow his Mayavadi philosophy are doomed. They will lose all their advancement in spiritual knowledge. So that verse right away suggests something, that is, that an acharya can come and establish the Yuga Dharma for a particular age. Like, for example, Lord Chaitanya came and established the Yuga Dharma for Kali Yuga, which is chant Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And one can attain all perfection in life just by chanting and following the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness. It's very simple. He simplified everything. And previously, Sankaracharya came, and he wrote the Sarirapasya. But he was ordered to do that by Lord Narayana himself. And this is explained in the Adi Lila, chapter 7, verse 110. Sankaracharya is not at fault, for it is under the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that he has covered the real purport of the Vedas. So why would Krishna order Sankaracharya to come and bewilder the world with Mayavad philosophy? Because at that time, India was being ruled by Buddhists. The very powerful king, a Vedic king, converted to Buddhism. And by that fact, almost all of India became Buddhist, and Vedic Dharma was rejected by Buddha, of course, because it was being followed incorrectly. So in order to bring it back to Vedic authority, Sankaracharya comes, defeats the Buddhists by re-establishing the authority of Vedic knowledge, but giving a Buddhist interpretation to it. Now, only a brilliant person like Sankaracharya could do such a thing, or Lord Shiva himself could do such a thing. And it says here in the One may argue that since Sankaracharya is an incarnation of Lord Shiva, how is it that he cheated people in this way? The answer is that he did so on the order of his master, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is confirmed in the Padma Purana in the words of Lord Shiva himself. Mayavadam asatchastram prachantam bodham uchyate mayaiva kalpitam devi kalo brahmana rupina, and so forth. It says, the Mayavada philosophy, Lord Shiva informed his wife Parvati, is impious, asat shastra, or asat shastra. It is covered Buddhism. In other words, Sankaracharya snookered the Buddhists by giving a Buddhist interpretation of the Vedas, or Vedic knowledge. And they accepted it. And because of that, the Buddhists were more or less kicked out of India, and so they went to, countries like Burma and Laos and Cambodia that weren't existing then, but there was that area, and Vietnam, and then also to Sri Lanka and places like that. And they kept some small presence in India, but basically they were converted back to the or many of them were converted back to the Vedic Dharma, but because he gave a Buddhist interpretation of the Vedas. This is brilliant and very misleading also. But yet, still, before he left his body, he said, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Mudamate. To give up all this word jugglery of the Vedic knowledge and just worship Govinda. But of course, his disciples didn't do that. Just like Prabhupada, before he left this world, he said, or he left his body, he said, I've only done 50% of my work. The other 50% is Varnashram Dharma. Well, that's almost like Sankaracharya near the end of his worldly existence. Well, he only lived, I think, 32 years, or was in his body for 32 years. He says, hey, wait a minute, don't listen to what I said before, now. Just let's just chant Hare Krishna and go back to Godhead, So, and give up all this word jugglery. So, but of course his main disciple, Sadananda Yogendra, didn't follow his instruction. And he, what did he do? He formalized the Sarirakbhasya knowledge and wrote his own book called Vedanta Sar, the essence of all Vedic knowledge. Right? So we cannot blame Sankaracharya for what he did, because he did it on the order of the Lord. And it says, he's speaking to Parvati, he says, in order to cheat the atheists, I described the Supreme Personality of Godhead to be without form and without qualities. Similarly, in explaining Vedanta, I described the same Mayavada philosophy in order to mislead the entire population toward atheism by denying the personal form of the Lord. In the Shiva Purana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead told Shiva, Dvapa parado yuge budva kalaya manasadisu swagamai kalpitais twamcha janam mad vimukhan kuru. In Kali Yuga, mislead the people in general by propounding imaginary meanings for the Vedas to bewilder them. These are descriptions of the Puranas. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur comments that Mukhya Vritti, the direct meaning, is Abhidha Vritti, or meaning that one can understand immediately from the statements of the dictionaries. Whereas Gona Vritti, the indirect meaning, is a meaning that one imagines without consulting the dictionary. For example, and this is how, we've done this. We've gone through different words and looked up the dictionary meaning, like Hinduism and so forth, and they are given imaginary meanings. They say yoga, not Hinduism, but the word yoga is a Hindu type of yoga in order to attain well-being of the mind and the body. That is not the definition of yoga, right? But that's an imaginary definition. So all the words that we use in Krishna consciousness are redefined by the Mayavadis, and so that they're devoid of any reference to Krishna as a person. Now we're going to discuss that more thoroughly now. So Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur says that this gunavritti, the indirect meaning, is a meaning that one imagines without consulting the dictionary. For example, one politician has said that Kurukshetra refers to the body, but in the dictionary there's no such definition. Kurukshetra is a place, right? It's in India. You can go and visit it today. It's the same place where the Battle of Kurukshetra took place 5,000 years ago. But yet somebody says it's a body, right? Therefore, the imaginary meaning is gonavritti, whereas the direct meaning found in the dictionary is mukhyavritti or abhidhavritti. Now, when he's referring to the dictionary, he's not referring to the Webster-Merriam dictionary or the modern dictionaries today, because they have all the false meanings. He's referring to the original Vedic dictionaries, and we'll discuss that another time. So then he says, therefore this imaginary meaning is gonavritti, whereas the direct meaning found in the dictionary is mukhyavritti or abhidhavritti. This is the distinction between the two. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommends that one understand the Vedic literature in terms of abhidhavritti, and the gonavritti he rejects. Sometimes, however, as a matter of necessity, the Vedic literature is described in terms of a lakshanavritti or gonavritti, but one should not accept such explanations as permanent truths. The purpose of the discussions in Upanishads and Vedanta Sutra is to philosophically establish the personal feature of the absolute truth. The impersonalists, however, in order to establish their philosophy, accept these discussions in terms of lakshanavritti or indirect meanings. Thus, instead of being tattvavada or in search of the absolute truth, they become mayavada or illusioned by the material energy. When Sri Vishnu Swami, one of the four acharyas of the Vaishnava cult, presented his thesis on the subject matter of Sudadvaita Vada, immediately the Mayavadis took advantage of this philosophy and tried to establish their Advaita Vada or Kevala Advaita Vada. To defeat this Kevala Advaita Vada, Sri Ramanujacharya presented his philosophy as Visista Advaita Vada, and Sri Madhvacharya presented his philosophy as Tattva Vada, both of which are stumbling blocks to the Mayavadis because they defeat their philosophy in scrupulous detail. Students of Vedic philosophy know very well how strongly Sri Ramanujacharya's Visista Advaita Vada and Sri Madhvacharya's Tattva Vada contest the impersonal Mayavada philosophy. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, however, accepted the direct meaning of the Vedanta philosophy and thus defeated the Mayavada philosophy immediately. He opined in this connection that anyone who follows the principles of the Sarirak Bhashya is doomed. This is confirmed in the Padma Purana, where Lord Shiva tells Parvati, Shrinu Devi Pravakshyami Tamasani Yata Kramam, and so forth. My dear wife, hear my explanations of how I have spread ignorance through Mayavad philosophy. Simply by hearing it, even an advanced scholar will fall down in this philosophy, which is certainly very inauspicious for people in general. I have misrepresented the real meaning of the Vedas and recommended that one give up all activities in order to achieve freedom from karma. In this Mayavad philosophy, I have described the Jivatma and the Paramatma to be one and the same. End of quote. How the Mayavad philosophy was condemned by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his followers is described in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Antya Lila, 2nd chapter, verse 94 through 99, where Swarup Damodar Goswami says that anyone who is eager to understand the Mayavad philosophy must be considered insane. This especially applies to a Vaishnava who reads Sarirak Bhashya and considers himself to be one with God. The Mayavadi philosophers have presented their arguments in such attractive, flowery language that hearing Mayavada philosophy may sometimes change the mind of even a Mahabhagavata or very advanced devotee. An actual Vaishnava cannot tolerate any philosophy that claims God and the living being to be one and the same. Okay, so that's a preamble. But when we come to verse 114, the devil is in the details, as they say in English. So now we're going to discuss the details, the nuts and bolts of Mayavad philosophy, by which it completely bewilders someone to believe things that are not true at all. And it makes them atheistic and makes them separated from Krishna. Therefore, it's even considered demoniac, especially when you get to Sadananda Yogendra, Sankaracharya's principal disciple, who codified it in such a way that completely rejects his guru's final instruction and establishes Mayavad philosophy, which is going on strongly today because of him, because of his codification of everything, rather than denouncing it. So the Mayavad philosophy is a philosophy of canceling things, canceling the whole culture of Krishna consciousness. Why? They say that there's no Vaikuntha planets or Goloka planet, no Krishna, and liberated persons in Vaikuntha planets. Both the Buddhists and the Mayavadis reject a personal God. They say that the material world does not exist. It is an illusion with no factual existence. And Sadananda Yogendra says that God and the living entity are one. Instead of worshiping God, they want to present themselves as God. They renounce, the Buddhists deny the existence of the soul and God. Sadananda Yogendra, in this Vedanta Sara, he says that the absolute is formless and is devoid of variegatedness. This is why Prabhupada is repeating in his purport today many times that it's impossible that there's no variegatedness, because all the descriptions of the Vedas prove that there is variegatedness in the spiritual world, right? So you have these two groups of impersonalists, the Buddhists and the Mayavadis. So the difference is the Mayavadis say there is God, but he's formless, and it's the Brahma Jyoti. So at least they reestablish the existence of a God, but they make him into like a Buddhist type of God, impersonal, right? But the Buddhists flatly deny the existence of the soul and God himself, or the super soul. They deny it. So there is a slight difference between the Buddhists and the Mayavadis. And that's and therefore the Buddhists never attain the spiritual world, whereas the Mayavadis can attain, a few of them can attain Brahman realization, which is in the spiritual world. The Buddhists, by their absolute neti, the truth cannot be this, cannot be that, their false nyaya, logic, attain the flip side of the material creation. So the flip side of material creation is called avyakta, the unmanifest state of matter. That's what they attain, and obviously it's not a transcendental position; it's a fallen position. So they never get out of the confines of the material world, and they come back again. Just like one time I had a friend, way before I was a devotee, who was a Buddhist. He was some American guy who got completely bewildered by Buddhist philosophy. So one day I asked him, what's this all about? He said, well, this is very simple. He said, it's like a wavelength. Waves go like this, right? So sometimes you're up here and sometimes you're down here. That's the way he explained Buddhism. Say. And then one time with Prabhupada, I arranged a meeting in the commercial attaché offices of the Indian Embassy in downtown Paris, and all these Buddhist leaders in France came to see him, and journalists came also, And when Prabhupada and the Buddhist leaders were having a discussion, one of the journalists asked a question to Prabhupada. He says, Your Honor, he said, I'm a little confused here. I can't figure out, what's the difference between you guys and the Buddhists? And Prabhupada said, it's very simple. He said, we accept Buddha as God, they don't. That was a brilliant explanation, right? Because, I was, when I heard that, I was just amazed that Prabhupada simplified it and it's a fact. They don't accept the existence of God. They don't think that Buddha is God. Of course, there is a small sect of Buddhists that worship Buddha like a deity and are very close to Vaishnavism. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj wrote a paper when he was in college trying to get his PhD. He wrote a paper about this one small sect of Buddhists who actually worship Buddha as if he's like Krishna, right? And they do arti, and they do everything. They offer prasadam. He actually met some of those people in China. But the large masses of Buddhists, they don't believe there's a God. They believe, if they ask Buddha the question, does God exist? He remains silent. And they definitely don't believe that soul exists. They only believe that there's something called the mind. And then sometimes the mind is in a liberated state, but it's actually not liberation, it's the avyakta state. And sometimes the mind is in the material world doing social work. The Buddhists do a lot of social work. Feed the poor, things like that. So, the Mayavadis, the modern Mayavadis, they say that the Absolute is formless and devoid of variegatedness. And they say everything is nirakar, formless. Have you ever heard that word nirakar? They say it all the time, nirakar, 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 nirakar. They use that word all the time, right? And they say the conception of Vishnu and the jiva, or the spirits, individual spirits, are both products of ignorance. When they say ignorance, they're referring to tamasa buddhi. The sum total, they say that Krishna is the sum total of ignorance in the material world. And therefore, when you reject Krishna, then you can attain liberation. Therefore, you should never listen to Mayavad philosophy, because it's the most dangerous and blasphemous philosophy. It's worse than just normal atheists. It's worse because they specifically target Krishna to destroy any factual belief in him. Okay? And then they say they cannot understand the distinction between material and spiritual varieties. They think all varieties are material. They conclude that because the Lord has distributed himself in an impersonal form, he has no separate existence as a person. They believe that the Lord is influenced by the modes of material nature. This is all very insulting to Krishna. And therefore, they are the worst aparadis, the worst insulters, the worst persons, worse than normal atheists that insult Krishna on a regular basis. Right? So these are some of the points of the Mayavad philosophy. Prabhupada says, the most prominent Mayavadi scholar, Sadhananda Yogendra, has written a book called Vedanta Sara, in which he expounds the philosophy of Sankaracharya, and all the followers of Sankara's philosophy attribute great importance to his, meaning Sadhananda Yogendra's, statements. In his Vedanta Sara, Sadhananda Yogendra defines Brahman as Sat Chitananda, combined with knowledge and without duality, and he defines ignorance, jada, as knowledge distinct from that of Sat and Asat. This is almost inconceivable, but it is a product of the three material qualities, goodness, passion, and ignorance. Thus, he considers anything other than pure knowledge to be material. The center of ignorance is considered to be sometimes all-pervading and sometimes individual. Thus, according to his opinion, both the all-pervading Vishnu and the individual living entities are products of ignorance. In other words, they don't exist. They're products of ignorance. The sum total of ignorance, he says, is Krishna himself, the concept of Krishna himself. In simple language, it is the opinion of Sadananda Yogendra that since everything is nirakara, formless, the conception of Vishnu and the conception of the individual soul are both products of ignorance. So that's, in simple language, what he's saying. And he also explains that the Visuddha Sattva conception of the Vaishnavas is nothing but pradhana, or the chief principle of material creation. In other words, this Visuddha Sattva state, transcendental state of Krishna consciousness, is material. It's not spiritual. And when all-pervading knowledge is contaminated by the Visuddha Sattva, which consists of a transformation of the quality of goodness, there arises the conception of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the omnipotent, omniscient, supreme ruler, the super soul, the cause of all causes, the supreme Ishvara, etc. According to Sadananda Yogendra, because Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, is the reservoir of all ignorance, he may be called Sarvagya, or omniscient. But one who denies the existence of the omnipotent Supreme Personality of Godhead is more than Ishvara, or the Lord. His conclusion, therefore, is that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Ishvara, is a transformation of material ignorance, and that the living entity, Jiva, is covered by ignorance. Thus, he describes both collective and individual existence in darkness. In other words, he's bringing Krishna down to the level of the Jiva, and he's rejecting both of them as ignorance. And basically, they don't, in his words, they don't exist. You see, this is worse than normal atheism, because he's specifically targeting Krishna and the Jiva. His conclusion, therefore, is that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Ishvara, is a transformation of material ignorance, and that the living entity Jiva is covered by ignorance. Thus, he describes both collective and individual existence in darkness, or ignorance. According to Mayavadi philosophers, the Vaishnava conception of the Lord as the Supreme Personality of Godhead and of the Jiva, or the individual soul, as his eternal servant, is a manifestation of ignorance. If we accept the judgment of Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, however, the Mayavadis are to be considered mayaprita jnana, or bereft of all knowledge, because they do not recognize the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or they claim that his existence is a product of the material conception maya. These are characteristics of asuras, or demons. See, they're not just atheists, the Mayavadis are actually demons, right? Because of the level of insult that they bring to Krishna. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in his discourses with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, said, Chivera nistira lagi sutra kaila vyasa mayavadi basya sunile haya sarvanasa. Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya 6.169. Vyasadeva composed the Vedanta Sutra to deliver the conditioned souls from this material world, but Sankaracharya, by presenting the Vedanta Sutra in his own way, has clearly done a great disservice to human society, for one who follows his Mayavad philosophy is doomed. In other words, their spiritual life is finished. They cannot have a spiritual life because they believe that there's no Vaikuntha, there's no Goloka, there's no Krishna, there's no Nanda Maharaj and Yasoda, there's no gopis, there are no cows. The whole thing, they say, is illusion, it's nonsense, it doesn't exist. And the material world is also non-existent. But at least in the material world, there's sex. But there's no sex, there's no possibility of sex in the spiritual world. Therefore, they emphasize sex in the material world by their philosophy. That's why so many Mayavadis fall down. Although they practice strict austerities, just like you have an example of Vishwamrita Muni. He's practicing severe austerity for 60,000 years, and then he falls down with Menaka and has a child. See? So all these great Mayavadis, you'll see, they all have problems in their life. Well, you might say, oh, Vaishnavas also have problems. Well, it might be true because they don't come to class regularly and they don't listen to the philosophy of Krishna consciousness on a regular basis. So they're just going on what they learned in the beginning or in the middle of their life. And that's not enough. You have to constantly hear the Vedic knowledge spoken by genuine devotees, and especially going over Prabhupada's purports. It's just like we're going over his purports right now. This is all very confidential knowledge and high quality knowledge. We have to hear it on a regular basis. Okay, so then Mayavadi philosophers' unrealizable ambition to become one with the Supreme through denying the existence of the personality of Godhead results in the most calamitous misrepresentation of spiritual knowledge. And one who follows this philosophy is doomed to remain perpetually in this material world. Therefore, the Mayavadis are called Avisuddha Buddhaya, or unclean in knowledge. Because they are unclean in knowledge, all their austerities and penances end in frustration. Thus, although they may be honored at first as very learned scholars, ultimately they descend to the physical activities of politics, social work, etc. Instead of becoming one with the Supreme Lord, they again become one with these material activities. This is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam 10.2.32, Arura Krichena Parampadam Tata Patante Adyo Nadrita Yusmad Angraya. In actuality, the Mayavadi philosophers very strictly follow the austerities and penances of spiritual life, and in this way they're elevated to the impersonal Brahman platform, but due to their negligence of the lotus feet of the Lord, they again fall down to material existence. So this is a very, either you become a total denier of Krishna and blasphemer of Krishna, you go to hell, or you follow strictly all the rules and regulations of sannyas and renounced life, and you attain Brahman and you fall down. Both ways you're falling, you see. So it's a hopeless thing, this Mayavad philosophy. Okay, so that is why Prabhupada has explained or has mentioned so many times. He says in this purport, such actions are but perverted reflections of the original reservoirs. The transcendental situation is not without spiritual variegatedness. In the spiritual world, all the perverted forms of material variegatedness are fully represented in their original spiritual identity. The only difference is that the material activities are contaminated by the three modes of material nature, whereas the potencies in the spiritual world are all pure because they are engaged in the unalloyed transcendental loving service of the Lord. In the spiritual world, the Lord is the sublime enjoyer of everything, and the living entities there are all engaged in his transcendental loving service without any contamination of the modes of material nature. The activities in the spiritual world are without any of the inebrities of the material world, but there's no question of impersonal voidness on the spiritual platform as suggested by the impersonalists. So you see, over and over again he's mentioning in this purport that there is varieties in the spiritual world. There are personalities in the spiritual world. And all that is denied by the Mayavadis. And Mayavadis have been around almost since the beginning of creation. So therefore, they are the original cancel culture people. They cancel Krishna. They cancel Vaikuntha. They cancel Goloka. They cancel the gopis. They cancel everything. And they say everything is formless in the spiritual world. And they say everything in the material world is an illusion. They cancel in the material world also. So what are you left with? You're left with either nothingness, like the Buddhists, or you're left with the merging as a non-person into the Brahmajyoti and then falling down. You see, that's the ultimate cancel culture right there. And then Prabhupada says, there's no question of impersonal voidness on the spiritual platform as suggested by the impersonalists. Devotional service is defined in the Narada Pancharatra as follows. Sarvapadi Vinir Muktam Hishikena Hishikesha Tatparat Nirmalam Hishikena Hishikesha Sevanam Bhakti Uchyate. Now this is very important, this verse, extremely important to understand. And it says, since all the senses are produced of the Lord's reservoir senses, the sensual activities of the material world are to be purified by the process of devotional service, and thus the perfection of life can be attained simply by purifying the present position of our material activities. So he's saying, look, right now we're all engaged in sense gratification. But you can do the same activities, but direct them toward pleasing the senses of Krishna. I remember one time I was with this one devotee who was instructing me in the beginning of my Krishna consciousness. His name was Omapati Das. And one time we were in the American Cultural Center, Boulevard Raspail in Paris, and we were we were both working there, and we were watching an event that was taking place called a Hoot Nanny. You know what a Hoot Nanny is? It's an American thing where everyone's doing the stomp dance. They're doing these cowboy dances that they do in the South of the United States. And Omapati told me, you see what they're doing? They're jumping up and down, they're singing, and they're dancing. He said, if they just, instead of going hoo-ha, blah, 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 if they just chanted Hare Krishna and did the same thing, they go back to Godhead. And he was right. He said, you just have to change the purpose from talking nonsense to chanting Hare Krishna and dancing and jumping up and down and having a great time and taking prasadam. And then you go back to Godhead. But they're doing it and talking all nonsense and saying all kinds of nonsense words, I love you, and baby, you left me, and you come back, and blah, blah, blah. And then, doing all these different steps. And, it's a very elaborate dance steps, the Hoot Nanny. And they're playing the guitars, and they're strumming and all that stuff. He said, all they have to do is just chant Hare Krishna and do the same jumping up and down and dancing. They would go back to Godhead. So basically, that's what's being said here. He says that since all the senses are produced of the Lord's reservoir of senses, the sensual activities of the material world are to be purified by the process of devotional service, and thus the perfection of life can be attained simply by purifying the present position of our material activities. And the purifying process begins from the stage of being liberated from the conception of different designations. So that's why it says, Sarvapadi vinirmuktam tatparat vena nirmalam rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhakti uchate. These upadis means all the false identifications. I'm a Andhra Pradeshi, or I'm a Telangana, or I am a Bangladeshi, or I'm a Bengali in West Bengal, or I am a North American, or I'm a South American. Just like one time I met this Arab, I said, where you live? He said, I live in the north. I said, you live in the north? You live in Sweden? He said, no, I live in North Africa. So you see how, at that time we were in Europe, I didn't, when he said I live in the north, I thought he meant Sweden or Denmark or Norway, He said, no, I live in North Africa, so people have these false identifications, and it's everywhere. In India, in Africa, you have all these tribal affiliations, and they kill each other because they're different tribes. The blacks have killed each other since time immemorial. They're doing the same thing in Chicago now, and all different cities in the United States. This black on black violence is much worse than the black on white violence, right? But that's nothing. I mean, that was going on when they were all living in Africa also. So it's nothing new, the black on black violence. And then white people kill white people and black people and so forth. So all these things are upadis, false identifications. So Prabhupada says the purifying process begins from the stage of being liberated from the conception of different designations. Every living entity is engaged in some sort of service, either for the self or for the family or the society, country, etc. But unfortunately, all such services are rendered due to material attachment. The attachments of the material affinity may be simply changed to the service of the Lord, and thus the treatment of being freed from material attachment begins automatically. So, we should identify ourselves as Achyuta Gotra, part of Krishna's family, not this Gotra or that Gotra. You see. So when we identify ourselves as part of Krishna's family, that's our real position. But if you say, no, I'm Armenian, or I'm Turkish, or I'm Arabic, or I'm Telangana, or I'm Andhra, or I'm this, or I'm Kerala, or I'm this or that. These are all false identifications. They're not real. And those are, what you say, stumbling blocks on the process of making spiritual advancement. So we should reject them and identify ourselves with Krishna. From that's the beginning of, he says, the purifying process begins from the stage of being liberated from the conception of different designations. Haribol. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. And then the last sentence he says, the process of liberation is therefore easier through devotional service than by any other methods. For in the Bhagavad Gita 12.5 it is said that one is subjected to various kinds of tribulations or problems if one is impersonally attached. Kleso dikaritaras tesam avyakta shakta chetasam. That's Srimad Bhagavad Gita 12th chapter, 5th verse. Haribol. Are there any questions? Yeah. As opposed to atheism. Yeah. The atheists can be demoniac also, but Mayavadis, they're specifically targeting destroying Krishna. Completely destroying Krishna as a person and just focusing on the Brahma Jyoti. Whereas the Buddhists, they destroy the Brahma Jyoti also. They're more atheistic, but they're not so, let's say, insulting to Krishna as the Mayavadis. Mayavadis specifically target Krishna, cancel Krishna. Why he did that? Because he was telling the truth.
But why they are not following that? Because in that story we realize that Krishna comes and afterwards.
Well, because, okay, it's like this. Why do people cheat when they know that they could go to jail by cheating? On their let's say their IRS forms, they underestimate their, or they change the credit and balance sheets to show a profit when it's actually a loss, or they show a loss when it's actually a profit, right? Sometimes they show a profit when it's actually a loss in order to get cheat banks and get money from the banks. And on other times they say there's no profit, although they made a profit, in order to cheat the IRS, not pay taxes, right? So why did they do that? Knowing that they could go to jail. Because they're attached. So as soon as a person is attached, they can make major mistakes. So if I'm attached, so Arjuna was attached, he thought he was a member of this particular family. And therefore, because the members of the family were on both sides of the battlefield, he refused to fight. He refused to follow Krishna's order. Because of attachment, false attachment. Yeah. So sometimes you'll see that due to attachment, people will violate Krishna consciousness and not follow Krishna's instructions. Just like one time I was speaking to this Orthodox Jewish man who was a friend of mine in France. And I was asking him some questions about their practices in Orthodox Judaism. And he said, and I asked him about sex. He said, yeah, well, sex, whenever we have sex, we're supposed to put a sheet over the wife and make one hole in it, and then we can have sex. He said, but I don't follow that rule. So, uh, I mean, he was being honest. I don't follow that rule, right? In other words, they do these things in order not to have lust when they're having sex with their wife or whatever. So, so why does a person knowingly violate some rule in life, whether it's the IRS or the bank or, like in the case of the Orthodox Jew? Because they're attached, and they're not going to compromise, and they're not going to adjust themselves. So when someone strictly follows Krishna consciousness, they make spiritual advancement. But if they have attachments, they're not going to follow everything. But that's why it says here that, let's read that again. In the purport, it says, and the purifying process begins from the stage of being liberated from the conception of different designations. So we have to be liberated from all these false designations. Then we can begin the process of purification. So therefore, Prabhupada says it in a very nice way. He said, you are not the body, you're the soul. And the body and everything in relationship with it is all going to end. But your relationship, the spiritual relationship with Krishna is going to be eternal. Okay? So he says it in a nice way. He doesn't say, give up being a Hindu and just chant Hare Krishna. He doesn't say it like that, right? He says, you're not this body. So he's saying it in a very gentle way. So, but it means the same thing. Hare Krishna. Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakyati Sadma Vando Mui Savadanama Te Vando Mui Savadanama Te Janara Prasade Bhai Eva Vaudhoriya Jai Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Shitete Goriya Gyan Arana Koriya Mane Asa Orana Korea Maneasa Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttamagati Ye prasade pure sarva sa Ye prasade pure sarva sa Chakshudana dila jaya janme janme Prabhu say Divya Gyani De Prakashito Prema Bhakti Jaha Hoite Avidya Vinasajate Vedegai Janara Charito Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu Vedegai Janara Charito Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu Lokanath Lokera Jivana Lokanath Lokera Jivana Ha Prabhu Kora Doya Deya More Padachaya Ebeas Gusaki Bhuvana Ebeas Gusaki Bhuvana Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Srila Prabhupada Patita Pavane Ki Jai. Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Pararaja Gachasta Tarasa Tarashi Shishimadis Divine Grace Lisi Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridasa Ki Jai Prem Sikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Dvaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivedanta Ki Jai Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Samkunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Shri Mayapura Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Tulasi Devi Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Ganga Maya Ki Jai, Jamuna Maya Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhakti Ki Jai, Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the symbol. All glories to the symbol. All glories to the symbol. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya. The lotus feet of our spiritual master, the only way by which we can attain to pure devotion service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great honor and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus feet. Attachment to his lotus feet is perfection, fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him, ecstatic prema emanates. By him, ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic singers carry. Our spiritual master, the ocean of mercy, friend of the poor and Lord and master of the devotees. O Master, be merciful to us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread throughout all the three worlds. We take shelter of your lotus feet. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.